Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of exponential technologies, business innovation, entrepreneurship, thought leadership, enterprise IT security, neuroscience, philosophy, personal development, and more. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. Today, my guest is Roger Grimes. Roger's expertise in the field of computer security is unparalleled. He describes himself as the best in the world when it comes to computer security defense, and he has the credentials to back up this assertion. He works with Kevin Mitnick, who he calls the best offensive security guy in the world, but he calls himself the best when it comes to defense. As all of you know by now, I love offense and defense innovation, so this interview falls squarely into the category of defense for sure. Roger has more than 40 computer certifications and 12 books authored or co-authored on computer security. He spent over 3 decades imparting his knowledge with audiences worldwide. His current title is Data-Driven Defense Evangelist at KnowBe4. He is the author of a new book called Hacking Multifactor Authentication, which I love. Roger is a 33-year computer security architect and cybersecurity veteran specializing in general computer security, identity management, PKI, Windows computer security, host security, cloud security, APT, and defending against hackers and malware. He's worked at some of the world's largest security companies like Foundstone, McAfee, and Microsoft. In this time of remote workforces and distributed endpoints, Roger advocates for multi-factor authentication. However, MFA is not the be-all and end-all for security. We discussed this. The vast majority of hacking doesn't care about your MFA. It's about reducing your risk, according to Roger. Throughout his many years in the industry, Roger's universal mission is to drive all his actions into making the internet a safer place. He says if he leaves the earth without accomplishing this feat, he's failed. I also provide you with a way to connect with him on LinkedIn. He has over 25,000 followers. We've been sold by the industry that MFA is the warm blanket, the panacea for all security ills. We're going to explore MFA in detail so you can learn more deeply about this topic as it's critical to your distributed security architectures, your strategy, and your tactics moving forward. A strong defense creates an amazing offense. I'm excited to share this conversation with such a distinguished and world-renowned security defense specialist. Now enjoy my conversation with Roger Grimes. All right, Roger, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Glad to be here. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Well, I'm very, very excited. You and I had a little bit of talk beforehand, and I think our listeners are in for a real special treat. I was bragging about you earlier today. I was talking to a CIO, and he's like, well, I really like talking about strategy. Do you want to go, can I talk strategy? And I said, listen, we can go into the worms or we can stay at the cloud level, metaphorically speaking. But I think our conversation is going to be wide and varied. But let me let you introduce yourself to my listeners.
Okay, so I'm Roger Grimes. I'm the Data-Driven Defense Evangelist for KnowBe4. They're the leading security awareness training vendor, helping people not to click on phishes. I've been doing computer security for 33 years. I earned all these gray hairs, and I've been everything from starting out as a PC repair technician, network manager, all the way to VP of IT for a lot of years. Always been interested in computer security. That really is what's captured my heart. I was even a CPA at one time, but I was a horrible CPA and was glad I got into computers. But I've done a lot. So I think that, and I've been writing a lot. I've written 12 books, over 1,000 magazine articles. For a lot of it is, I was the InfoWorld and CSO weekly security columnist for 15 years. And before that, I was even testing security equipment for them in the security testing center. And so it's kind of great that I've gotten paid to really look at and review tons of stuff. I've done a lot. I was a penetration hacker, penetration tester for 20 years for Microsoft and Foundstone and my own companies. I broke into every company I was ever hired to break into in an hour or less, even though I had like 2 weeks or 2 months, depending on the gig to do so, except for one place that took me like 3 to 5 hours because the second time I was back there and they'd closed most of the holes. But then I found it with a blank SQL essay password.
See, now I know why you and Kevin got along so well, because he's of course he's one of the world's famous hackers, and that could be on your LinkedIn profile. I've hacked into every website that I've ever worked for to test in less than an hour.
You know what's interesting is, from having worked with a lot of good hackers, and Kevin, let me say, I've been friends with Kevin for a long time. Even wrote one of my first articles decades ago when he got arrested was, people are like, free Kevin, free Kevin. I was like, no, put his ass in jail, right? He broke the law. I have a very moral compass, and he broke the law and he needed to go to jail. And he didn't even steal money. He was just hacking the hack. But when he got out of jail, he was in there for a couple of years. He really turned and he became a white hat hacker. And I was very dubious of him. But I actually wrote another column a couple of years ago, and I'd met him, talked to him at conferences. I said, no, he's really made the turn. A lot of the white hat hackers like, oh, this guy's still hacking. He had made the turn. And I interviewed him for one of my books a couple of years ago. And he said, and I love it, he explains it all. He goes, I get the same thrill from hacking as a penetration tester as I did as a hacker, but there's just more paperwork. And I was like, yeah.
It's perfect. I love that. One of the interesting things when KnowBe4 was just getting launched, maybe not just launched, but it hadn't hit the cultural sort of zeitgeist momentum that you guys are at right now. We went to a conference and he was handing out these cards that were made out of steel.
He still does.
Oh, he still does?
Yeah, the lock picks. The lock pickers.
Is it just him, or does the whole company have those
Well, it's just him, but I have so many people that ask me for them. I carry them with me, and I run out. But what's interesting is hanging around all the good hackers. Let me say, Kevin is probably the best hacker I've been around, and I've been around a lot of good hackers. I always broke into everything I wanted to, but on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, I'm a 5, maybe a 6. But let me say, on computer security defense, I think I am the guy in the world. There is no one that can defend better than I can. I know it's a cocky thing to say, but it just is what it is. I know a lot about it. I know a lot about risk-based security. I've yet to meet somebody that knew more about it. And let me say, the best, if you say, how do I defend myself? I'm the guy you want to talk to.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because I didn't say that to everybody listening, that I thought you were the world's foremost authority on multi-factor authentication. And you just wrote a book called Hacking Multifactor Authentication. And then you just put a stake in the ground and you said you're the best defender in the world. So we'll have to put that up against the best MFA. Well, I guess the MFA now, I was just talking to someone about this, that with people really strewn quite, not just within the 4 walls of their business or their remote offices, now they're essentially, CISO just told me recently that he had 35 offices and he was securing 700 people. Wow. Well, now he's securing 700 remote offices. And this is a compliance-oriented organization. So now it's not just the digital, but it's also making sure that the policies around printing material and using printers to print out documents. There was a whole set of things that they were used to within their 4 walls that now they got to do for people from home. So quite interesting that way. How do you look at this kind of a new footprint, a new expanded security footprint that we're in?
So the things that make people secure, the best security stuff they can do doesn't really change whether you're at home or whether you're at work. But I think certainly everybody's changing a lot. Very few people had, if you had remote workers, it was a handful of people or small percentage usually for most companies to 100%. And, people found out many of the things that wouldn't work well at scale remotely. And so you get all this new software, new VPNs, new this, new that. And I think that besides the challenges of just trying to secure those 700 offices, what a great quote. I think that, so it's a scaling issue, but it's also, there's a lot of changes going on, and the hackers and the phishers take advantage of that, right? I don't think if you sent to any employee that, hey, here's a new VPN software, because our old VPN software was this, and there is a lot of people that might fall for that type of scam where if they're inside the office, no. When your job isn't really changing a whole lot and all of a sudden now you're in all kinds of turmoil, it's easier for things to sneak through and somebody be tricked into clicking on something and installing something they shouldn't.
Yeah, just because they're not within that 4-wall environment with that same control.
So it's kind of a double challenge, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you and I talked a little bit about risk, and you even just mentioned it a minute or two ago. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because I think security professionals now, we've been kind of in this market that is risen for the past decade, which is unprecedented. And then all of a sudden now we've got the bubble's been burst a bit with the corona. I'm thinking that risk is now going to be first and foremost. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, here's a wild thing. Let me see. I wrote not to always push my books, but I consider out of the 12 books I have, there's one called Data-Driven Defense, Data-Driven Computer Defense, came out a couple of years ago. That's my magnum opus. The other books don't matter near as much as that one. And if someone says, well, Roger, which of your books should I read? That one, because the lessons that it teaches in there about how to do better risk-based security underlies everything else. And the vast majority of companies do not do their risk right. They're absolutely horrible at it. So social engineering is responsible for 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches today. Unpatched software, about 20 to 40%. And then you have some, they overlap each other. Everything else you can think of, password hacking, insider threat, whatever, only accounts for about 1 to 10% of the risk in most organizations. If you can think of how somebody's been compromised, that you've even read in the paper on your own devices and computers at home, it was probably social engineering or unpatched software. And yet the average company doesn't devote 5% of their resources to fixing those things. And they actually aren't fixed. They're never fixed. And they have been the number one, number two. They change positions sometimes, but they've been the number one, number two ways to break into somebody's network or device for all 30 years I've been in computers. It's not a surprise. Yeah, you have all these people, I got to get the latest endpoint detection. I need to get the best intrusion detection. I need to get this thing and that thing. But they're not concentrating on just doing, it's not a surprise. I feel like I'm Warren Buffett telling people to buy low and sell high, and then you just can't get people to do that. I'm literally saying you should patch your software and not get tricked into doing something bad. And that's it. And people don't do it. And they're like, we got hacked again. How was it? Oh, it was social engineering, unpatched software. And then they go out and they buy a $100,000 appliance device that does some fancy future detection thing that they've been sold, but they're not making patching better and they're not working harder to stop. We're trying to stop social engineering. I'm like, well, are you really effectively, aggressively? Because it's your number one threat. No company I've ever met has treated it like the number one threat, or they're like, well, we're worried about ransomware. Ransomware is an outcome of you not being patched or being socially engineered. Ransomware is not your problem. That is an outcome of a problem. And people don't focus enough on the root exploit entry points. There's 10 of them, and there's only 10 ways that hackers and malware break into your environment. And it's like every computer company is like, my house is broken into again. My house is broken into again. My house is broken into again. And you're like, well, how are they broken in? They're like, I don't know. The thief got in the bedroom. Thief got in the bedroom. Thief got in the bedroom. But if you don't know, is it through the door or the window? Or maybe they learn. Let me tell you how bad it is. They learn that the thief is coming through the window. Every time they've broken in and spin through a window, I'm going to go out and buy a door with more locks. That literally is how bad we have this entire industry that seems like it's matured with the most immature risk model I've ever seen in my life. We were told, computer security is about risk management, but there's almost no consideration of risk in most of the decisions at all. Someone reads from a book and goes, oh, this threat, let's say Meltdown Inspector. Meltdown Inspector, that's the most highest risk exploits, impacts all CPU chips made since the 1990s. And if you don't patch it, you're at high risk. And if you're on a software vulnerability report, software patch vulnerability report, it's going to say Meltdown Inspector, critical risk, patch them now. There has never been, as far as I know, a successful public used Meltdown or Spectre exploit against any company in the entire global world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think people have a problem with the Microsoft patches, but I think they have a lot of problems with the third-party apps. I think the third-party applications, especially the ones that introduce system instability, so it almost becomes like an availability problem as much as a patching problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's certainly, but let me say this. If you look at the data, only 2% of exploits that are announced. So last year we had 12,174 things you're supposed to patch. Year before that, it was almost 15,000. Year before that, it was almost 17,000. So 12,000, great. We should celebrate. Less than 2% of those were ever actually used ever in the field. But most people don't know that. And so they're trying to patch it all. And so if you have a patch management program, they got 5,000 things they want to patch. When the reality is, if you focus better at 100% patching of the 10 most likely things to be patched, you'd be far better off.
So the 10 most likely things to patch are different than what you mentioned earlier, the 10 ways that I could hack you. right?
Yeah.
Okay. So so it's really interesting. You're almost saying that you need to take an 80-20 analysis, kind of like use a Pareto Principle and look, where would you go to find that? Like if I had to do patching, I'm a new CIO, or I'm an old CIO for that matter. I'm at an organization with 400 systems strewn across Azure, AWS, on-prem co-location facilities, and I've got to execute on patching. Where would I find my top 20% if you were running the show?
Actually, when I came up with this idea that Data-Driven Defense, it was like 20 years ago, and I wrote 10 or 15 columns, and then I wrote a white paper for Microsoft, and then I wrote this book. There was nothing. And I have webinars and talks and book cover it the best. But there's actually entire companies now, just off the top of my head, Kenna Security that I like, and there's another one called Risk-Based Security that companies, if you interact with them, they'll actually measure and determine what is the real risk. Like you don't have to worry about your cafeteria program being compromised. Right. Sure. But if you're still not patching Oracle Java, that's a problem, and that's the issues. I even talk about, I can tell people if someone talks to me in 10 minutes, I can tell them how to figure out how they're being compromised and how to close those holes. Like one of the biggest numbers that no one ever gets is how long did the malware dwell before it was detected and removed? Because it's not to the antivirus interest to tell you that, hey, it took us 3 weeks. Like the average ransomware program is in up to 8 months before it's detected and removed or goes off. So when an antivirus detects something and removes it, your risk is kind of gone. Most of the risk is when it's in your system collecting passwords and getting ready to encrypt things. But software doesn't tell you that. It doesn't tell you. It's just like, we got rid of this malware program. So I tell people, like a little hint I tell them is enable application control software like AppLocker in audit-only mode, so that it detects every time there's a new execution. And then every time you have a malware detection, compare it on that device or workstation to when that execution first occurred. So the malware detects it, removes it, and it's always got a name. And you just search back in the AppLocker log, find the first execution, and you know how long it was living on that computer. And was it 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 3 weeks, 8 months? And you can start to literally in a day, I could help you set up a system in a day.
So is AppLocker I think if it's a whitelisting system, right? You can kind of whitelist, but you're saying turn on audit only mode first before you turn on. So it's really
enforcement. Yeah. When you most people, when they think of application control, which is whitelisting, blacklisting, they think about the enforcement mode, the blocking mode. And you really have to be thoughtful about that. And you're going to make a lot of people mad if you don't do it well. Audit only mode, when I turn on AppLocker in particular on Microsoft, no one even knows it occurs. Like we turned it on across Microsoft and nobody even knew, not even the computer security people, because it's uninvasive, but it's recording the event. So you can actually snapshot a computer and say, this is all the legitimate stuff. And then AppLocker will put a different code out for anything that's installed or executed after that snapshot. It's an event error message 8003. Sure. And you can literally, every time you get 8003, you can pick up that event, throw it in the database. Every time you get a malware detection, go look in that database. Even fileless malware, like people like, can you detect fileless malware? Yes, it works. And then you can determine what's my dwell time, because that's really your risk. And you can track it per workstation. Like if Bill's computer gets compromised, if it's detected and removed in a second or a minute, not as much stuff I need to worry about. If it's on Bill's computer for 3 weeks, Bill's got to start deciding, okay, it could have been capturing my passwords, key logging me, where have I been, what did I do? And if it's on a CEO's computer, how long it was there. Well, and you can collect aggregate statistics as well and go, okay, we're using this software program, this AV or endpoint detection, and our dwell time starting to increase. Well, if you have the data, you can go to that vendor and go, hey, our dwell time for this ransomware used to be really good, but now it's starting to lengthen. When you give them the data, they'll actually respond and fix that problem. So, and it's amazing. It's free. All it takes is picking up events from 2 different things, putting them in a database and running a script that does a comparison.
Pretty straightforward. And so that's basically a 0 day. That's how you're dealing with 0 day versus like a signature. So basically what you just described was with the fileless and with non-signatures, is how that particular product is just doing a compare between system states.
Yeah. And now it's not always going to be 0 days. It could be they downloaded BearShare or something like that. But you could investigate that at the very least. And actually, Bit9 Parity is the first one that I love what they did. They're now owned by Black Ice or something like that today. But the Bit9 parity product, the first time I saw this, it actually ranked like if someone executed bear share, and bear share at that point in time was being used by a lot of malware programs, it would give it a higher risk score. So you could but what I'm saying is the app locker for Windows machines, it's free.
Yeah.
And literally you can set up a system in a day. And my thing is, you got to be careful, because if you're following every new execution, there's a lot of false positives in there. What I'm saying is, if the malware detector finally detects it, at least you can determine dwell time. But you could do what you say, Bill, but that takes a little bit more intelligence. That may be too much noise trying to figure out if every new execution is malware. But certainly if you followed that up and looked into it, you could detect 0 days and new programs. But at the very least, getting dwell time, right? Because that's your risk. But almost, if I go to somebody and go, what's the average length malwares in your company? The average answer I get is they're like, oh, we don't have any malware in our company. Or it detects and removes it. I'm like, have you ever been to Google's virus total? Like, that's 72 antivirus engines, and they never all detect anything ever. Like, if you get a 30% hit rate across all the antivirus engines, I mean, you found a program that's well known. Every bit of malware that I work, almost everything is not detected by anything for weeks to months. Yeah. And even after like a week or two, it's only detected by a couple of things. So, again, dwell time's a big deal. There's a lot more malware hanging out in people's systems than anybody knows about. And why? Because they're not asking the right question, and they're not putting instrumentation into the environment to detect it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, asking the right question would put the right defense in place. So if you make the assumption that I am hacked, that I do have malware, then you would, byproduct of that would mean you'd have the right instrumentation on there.
Yeah, Albert Einstein said, if you gave me an hour to answer a question that my life depended upon, I would spend the first 55 minutes trying to think about the right questions to ask. For if I asked the right questions, I'd be able to give you the answer, no problem. Something like that. Paraphrase. Well,
I mean, but nobody wants to ask that question, because, especially in front of their boss, because their boss has hired them to be I'm the best defender out there. But if the best defender comes in and goes, well, we need to assume we're breached, then it becomes a system availability. How quickly can we recover? How can we root out and find? How can we
ready for this? I'm ready. I hate assume breach. Assume breach is for losers.
Okay.
The reason that we do have to assume breach. Assume breach says you're either compromised. You have to assume you're either currently compromised or could easily be compromised. And we do have to do that. That is the right mentality today, because we are not correctly, more strongly stopping stuff. You can't put 5% of your resources against 70% of your problem and think that you're doing a good job and wondering, well, how come we're still being compromised? Oh, we got hacked again. Like, I used to be amazed. I would go to customers and I would say, you need to do this. You need to patch Java. You need to change this configuration, whatever it was. And I'd say, every time you pay me, when I was with Microsoft, it was like this $40,000 engagement. And I had to give you an 80-page report with 50 things that were broken. But I went out of my way to go, this is the thing you need to fix first. Never but once in 12 years of Microsoft did the customer ever fix the thing I told them that was number one. And they would be compromised. There would be $100 million fines. CISOs would be fired. CEOs would be fired. And the people that came in to replace them wouldn't fix it. They go, oh, we can't. Like I'd say, you need to patch Java. That was a big one while I was there. You need to patch Java. Java in 2005 was responsible for 91% of all exploits by itself, meaning that if you patch just Java, almost all your risk is gone. But they wouldn't do it. I'd come back in 6 months or a year, and they wouldn't do it. And I go, how come? You're like, well, it breaks things. I'm like, well, your answer shouldn't be binary. It shouldn't be, well, we can't fix it. It breaks things. There's a lot of things you can do besides just give up. And then like, oh, we got broken into, probably Java.
So, I feel like I'm sitting in front of an oracle at some respects. And so, you just wrote this book, this, and I know you have this other magnum opus that you put, the data-driven security, but I'd like to, if we can ask you a couple questions about MFA, multi-factor authentication. And, you have a general thesis. Let me just start there, is that obviously your general thesis is in the introduction of the book, but then we can get into some of the mechanics and people can go buy it and, and get in more of the specifics. But I really would like to know your general thesis on this, because I do believe MFA were being sold a bill of goods. And I'd love to get your general thesis on multi-factor, and then we'll jump into some of the details.
Okay, well, so it came about because actually Kevin Mitnick, He did a demo a year or two ago about him hacking MFA around LinkedIn.
And I know that you have the link for that in your book, and so I'll provide that because I saw it on the Kindle version. I'll provide that for listeners to go look at.
Anybody that sees it for the first time, almost everybody's like, "Oh my God!" Like I can literally just be sent a phishing email, and it's like my MFA is not there. Well, we got a ton. We had dozens or hundreds of people calling in that wanted to interview Kevin, and they said, "Roger, can you pick it up? You know MFA?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've been hacking MFA for my entire career." And I was surprised by not only how many reporters that, like, people are saying, "Have y'all reported this yet to Microsoft? Have you reported this to MITRE as a common vulnerability exploit?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? He's using a tool that's been around for 10 years, and the exploit he tried has been around for 30 years." I was surprised by not only how many newbies didn't know that, but my friends that were 10, 15, 20-year computer security experts were thinking it was something new. So I was like, wow. And I ran into a lot of companies that were like, we deployed MFA and we've actually been hacked more, right? Or cryptocurrency people that said, we got hacked and I lost $2 million. I've gone back to password. So what I figured out was that people get given an MFA solution to log into the corporate networks, their bank account or whatever. And there is this unearned expectation that they can't be hacked, like this thing. And they're told, use this so you can't get hacked. And that there's a difference between saying, so MFA is a good thing to have, and you should use it where you can in most instances. Unfortunately, 98% of the world doesn't use MFA, won't let you use MFA, but it's a good thing to use. But there's a difference between saying MFA significantly reduces some types of authentication attacks, which are just a small part. Remember, I just told you 70, 90% of social engineering doesn't care about your MFA that much. 20 to 40 patching. If you don't patch your software, doesn't care about your MFA. So the vast majority of hacking doesn't care about your MFA, but MFA will significantly reduce the risk of, let's say, phishing that's trying to get your password. If you don't have a password, they can't phish you out of it. So there's a difference between saying MFA significantly reduces from 100% to 1% many forms of hacking, of authentication hacking. And then what people feel, which is, I've got MFA and I can't be hacked.
Yeah.
There is and what happens when I talk to people is once the attackers learn that the bank or this person's using a particular type of MFA, they just start creating more focused attacks that work more often because the end user is now, and the end user's not been told that they have to worry about hacking. They've been told the reason why we're making you go through all this extra work is so you won't get hacked. Right. And so they all of a sudden don't start paying attention, and the phishing emails don't seem as dangerous when the Kevin Mitnick demo of LinkedIn just shows you click on a link in an email and it's game over.
And you can bypass your authenticator. So one of the things that I think people are faced with is now large chunks of the population are working from home, which means that a lot of the security controls and the analytics systems, authentication systems, and now they're truly cloud-based. And then now people are authenticating and they're needing to federate identity into, either Azure AD or some form of flavor of AD. And now we're layering multi-factor into that, and sometimes with third parties that are inheriting Microsoft's. Sometimes they're taking over Microsoft from an identity perspective. And I think there's a lot of complexity here. And then they're going into the apps, and the actual account takeovers are happening where there's impersonation happening, impersonation attacks. So I'm just wondering, where do you think we're going with multi-factor now in this kind of world we're in?
Well, there's certainly more of it, and going to be more and more and more. And I'm big fans of some types. Like I literally pick winners and losers in the book. Like I don't like SMS-based multi-factor authentication.
I know you don't like it.
I like push applications. So you've got a phone application like Google and Microsoft and others will send you a message. Is this you trying to log on in? Yes. The push applications are fairly secure. FIDO things are fairly secure. FIDO puts down man-in-the-middle attacks and easy phishing attacks. So I'm a big fan of those two technologies. And they're starting, like FIDO is becoming a bigger standard, but it's been 30 years. I've been waiting for 30 years for some MFA to, like back in the day, it was RSA Secure ID, if you remember that.
Yeah, with the tokens, yeah.
Yeah, but like whatever becomes big and we're told is the next greatest standard. So like right now, let's say it's FIDO. And let me say, I am a huge...
Can you explain FIDO just for my semi-tech people that are listening?
Yeah, so FIDO, it uses, behind the scenes, it's using a public-private key. It's passwordless authentication. Probably the most common types are something like a hardware key that you plug in, a UBA key or something like that, but it could be biometric or any other. It doesn't have to be multi-factor, but it often is. But the great thing about FIDO that I love is that it registers its token with the actual website and won't work if you get misdirected to another website. So there is this registration where you're taking, you could have a FIDO key or a hardware device, software device that is registered to you. And then you actually have to ahead of time register it for every site and service you want to use it to. And if somebody is trying to misdirect you to those places, it's not going to work. It's not even going to come on. But the problem is okay, I can't hack it that way. I guess I can hack I looked at 130 MFA solutions. I can hack them all at least 4 or 5 ways. And most of them 11 or 12 ways. And it's funny, the MFA people are always like, you can't hack mine. You can't hack mine. And then I like literally look at a solution in 5 minutes. I'm like, this is how I can do it. Boom, boom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they'll come up and they'll fight me. And in fighting me, I'll find like 3 or 4 or 7. I have so many people tell me I can't hack their MFA solution, and I can. Just verbally in their face, that I now go, I want $20,000 before I go through this exercise. I'm just tired of doing it. You need to do some threat modeling on your solution. Read my book if you want to, but there is no solution that can't be hacked multiple ways, because a lot of the ways are even out of the control of the MFA person. And they'll say, or the vendor, and they go, well, I can't control DNS, or I can't control this. And I'm like, of course. And that's why you're hackable. But, if an end user is relying upon your solution to make sure that they're not hacked and they get hacked, they don't really care that you weren't the reason why they were hacked. They just know that they relied upon a device that they told that would allow them not to get hacked, and they got hacked. That's the real world.
Is there using your 80-20 analysis that we were just talking about earlier, is there some high-risk areas that most CIOs and CISOs, that if they can check the boxes on multi-factor authentication, that you think are sort of fall into that highest risk category area where you sort of got to peel back the onion a bit?
Yeah, so I think any of them that allow somebody to be man in the middle, so that would be like the LinkedIn example. If someone can log in to a session, but be man in middle and not really be. So what happens when you're in a man in middle attack? It's called network session hijacking. Is the attacker convinces you to come into a proxy site that is bringing all the information from your intended destination and brings it to the victim, and everything the victim says and does is proxied through to the destination web server. They don't know there's a man in the middle involved. Sure. So when a solution has that pre-registration where I only work with this particular website, that stops proxies man in the middle. So there's a lot of solutions that do that. I like solutions that do, one-time based passwords if it's done well. Okay. That's the problem, is that every solution you give me, there's good implementations, bad implementations. FIDO. If I see FIDO, I like it. Yeah. But there's FIDO one-factor solutions where you just plug it into the computer. Well, that means if you lose your USB key and somebody else plugs it into their computer, they're you.
Right.
And they're like, oh, it's two-factor. You have to push a button. I'm like, well, that ain't much of a security bar. So that it's just, or biometrics. I hate biometrics by themselves. Biometrics can be, number one, stolen and reused. And what are you going to do? Change your retina or your fingerprint? Right. But they're never as accurate as they claim, ever, ever, ever. And if you allow biometrics to be used to remotely log in like we are in these COVID days, well, you're just being a fool because anybody can fake that fingerprint. Our biometrics, we can't change your fingerprint. So bad guy steals our fingerprints. Then remotely, you're insane if you allow biometrics, because all the biometric readers are horrible. Like your fingerprint is possibly unique in the world. We don't know that for sure. We've not taken everybody's fingerprint. It's unique in the world. But the way that fingerprint is read is maybe different from other people, maybe different from 15,000 people's fingerprints. It's because the scanners have to intentionally, not really work that well. Like your cell phone. If you want to, I have my cell phone, I opened it up with a fingerprint. When I can't open it right away using my fingerprint, I'm kind of mad. And if it didn't let me in, I would stop using that method or stop using that cell phone. But I'm amazed sometimes how little of my finger I get on that scanner before it logs me in. So they literally intentionally detune it. And every time you detune the scanner or the reader, the biometric, and they're like, oh, your retina is 1 in 2 trillion. Nobody can ever have that. It's just not true. It could be. They don't measure it that way because your fingerprints get little micro abrasions and cuts in the valleys. So they have to intentionally detune them. So I like biometrics if you use it with some other factor, but just doing biometrics, and let me say like fingerprints, I've spent a life hacking fingerprint scanners, and sometimes it's as easy as going up to the fingerprint reader if they have the flat glass and blowing cupped air. And actually the moisture from my air activates the oils and logs me in as that person.
No way.
I've done that on building entry doors all my life. I don't need special fingerprint spray, and I don't have to create a Play-Doh finger. Hot air. There's something wrong with the system when my hot air activates your fingerprint oils and I'm in the system.
How did you get involved? How did you start out in computers? What was your first experience with a computer?
Yeah, so, skipping kind of when I got into computers, which was a great story in itself, but because I was clueless. But computer security, I actually read a couple of good books. A book from Ross Greenberg, one of the early antivirus makers, and he wrote a book called Flu Shot, where he invited malware people to attack him. That and the Clifford Stoll's honeypot book. What's that called? Clifford Stoll. He's famous for his one honeypot book, and it got me into honeypots. And then I joined the internet. So I was a CPA, certified public accountant, working in an accounting firm. Absolutely the worst CPA you ever met. I never finished a tax return that was ever given to me. When they gave me an audit, I shoved it in the back of my drawer where I knew it would fall behind and go lower, and I couldn't find it. And that was going to be my excuse as to why I hadn't done the audit. So I apologize to anybody whose taxes I did or audit during that time. But I started reading, and it really caught me. I wanted to fight these hackers, and I joined the FidoNet before the internet was around. ARPANET was around. It was called the FidoNet, and bulletin board systems you had to dial up. And I started getting viruses, and I started disassembling them for John McAfee. I joined a group called the PC Antivirus Research Foundation. This is like 1987, 89. Wow. There's only like 3 or 4 viruses in the world at the time. There's an app. The first PC virus is Elk Cloner, written by 15-year-old Richard Scalorenta in like 85. By the time I got into it, it's Pakistani Brain, Stone viruses like 85, 86, 87. And it just sparked something in me. And I was doing it so much. I was disassembling viruses so much that my wife said, why don't you do this for a living? And I was like, no, I've got my CPA, I'm an accountant, but she's like, you're literally ignoring the family all the time in me. Because she would tell me, you're not spending time with me. So I'd spend time with her, fake going to sleep with her, get up and work all night. Like, wow.
You were just that passionate.
Yeah, why don't you do this for a living? So I went through a lot of different jobs, but even when I was a VP of IT, I was mostly neglecting every job I ever had to do computer security. Like it was overwhelming. I was in Newsweek in 1992 when the Michelangelo virus was going off, working with John McAfee at the time.
Sure.
And I don't know how I didn't get fired because it's all I cared about. I remember one time that I had a news crew coming in from like CBS News, and I was a PC network manager or something, And I remember my CEO just seeing this news crew going to my office going, what's going on? I was talking about viruses, but I finally decided one day, hey, I want to do this full time a bunch of years ago. And I've never looked back. I remember, although I laughed, because I remember I was telling my wife, I'm like, hey, I'm going to quit this VP of IT thing, and I'm just going to do computer security full time. And then she's like, no. We got to make a living. We got a wife, you got a wife, you got kids and the house and cars and everything. And I remember I was thinking, I wonder if this computer security thing is really going to hold out. Like, we're getting better at detecting viruses, and we kind of know how to stop it. You just got to stop social engineering and patching. Certainly passwords will be gone in a couple of years. We'll figure out how to stop the phishing emails. Right? They're coming up with new protocols. I laugh hysterically because that we were thinking, is there going to be enough business there?
Yeah. Well, there's going to be an industry that emerges from this, because it wasn't popular. I mean, it wasn't popular in the days that when you get started. When I started Red Zone in 2001, we got started as a security vendor, and we started working with credit unions. But
I remember the worm back then, Code Red.
Yeah, Code Red, exactly.
Yeah.
But it wasn't popular. It's only specific industries really cared. In fact, the first CISO, do you know when the first CISO was anointed?
No.
I might be off by a year, but I think it was 1998. The first CIO was 95, CIO. And shortly thereafter, a CISO. It might have even been later. The official, like Fortune 100 type designation. And so it's a really relatively new profession in American business. I mean, you think of the role of the CFO, how long that's been around. or an operations or the CEO. But the role of a CISO, the role of a CIO is a relatively still a new position. And I think it's further complicated because at least with American business, we have like GAAP accounting principles, we have debits and credits, and you sort of have a governing body that says, this is a correct accounting for a business, but we don't really have that for security, do we?
Yeah, and you ready for full circle where it gets really bad? Is that now compliance wins over security, even when compliance is bad. And a great example is password policy.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
So NIST has always been kind of our password Bible, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they've been publishing for decades what's called the password policy and what's called NIST Special Publication 800-63. And they're the ones that said 2 decades ago, your password should be long, complex, and frequently changed, right?
Yep.
So that's you name the regulation, PCI DSS, Sarbanes-Oxley, NERC, the Microsoft policy, whatever, that's what everybody follows for 20 years. So then at around 2016, NIST started doing research and inviting professors that had done research and password stuff. And they found out that turns out if your password's long, complex, and has to be changed at preset intervals, that it actually increases the risk to the organization or person that they will be hacked because of that password, because of password reuse across. So it turns out the average person has 170 plus websites and services that they log into in the course of a given year.
Okay.
And they only have 3 to 19 passwords. So they compromise, due to no fault of your own, like Facebook got compromised, Adobe.com got compromised, got my login name and password is out there 10 times, according to the Have I Been Pwned website by Troy Hunt. And it is, and I was like, I didn't even know these, but I joined Adobe so many years ago. How do I know? I was never notified. I don't remember them being hacked, but they were. And my password is out there. I've checked. And then, they're older, but that was the problem, is that if it was reused, somebody gets it on Adobe. Goes, let me go see if Roger logs into Amazon that way, and Instagram and Facebook. Turns out there's a really high correlation. So in 2017, September 2017, NIST said, we were wrong, do the opposite. We now recommend don't require complexity, don't require length, do not do forced password changes. Only change it if you have to. Don't use SMS, don't reuse passwords across different websites, try to use MFA, don't use the SMS one. And so it's called Digital Identity Guidelines. So that's been over 3 years ago. And to date, there is not a compliance audit law regulation that doesn't require the old method. So nobody, as far as I know, nobody, even the government, can follow NIST's recommendation because you will fail an audit, and nobody wants to fail a compliance audit. So everybody's using the method that 20 years of data has shown makes you at higher risk. And when I tell people this, almost all the better computer security experts do not believe me, because it's just common sense that long, complex, frequently changing passwords is going to protect you. Well, turns out that's not what the data shows. Or there's a great friend of mine that's over in Microsoft Research. He said, I can't remember his name. I'm terrible with names, Bill. He said, you can design a system for 6 million people, but 6 million people are going to respond the way that 6 million people are going to respond. And it may not be the way that you thought. And if that's the case, you need to update your system.
So when you look at right now, multi-factor, what's the message you want people to take away from this? Because I keep coming back. I interview a lot of CIOs, and it is very complex for them because they're maintaining systems now, both on-prem, some still at their own data center, and Amazon, Azure, and then a wide variety of SaaS applications. And they've got to authenticate people into these systems, and they're not quite sure how to do it. And what I've heard over the past 2 years is, we use Okta, we use Duo, we use Azure AD, they're hustling their buns off to get these systems installed. And I think they think that they're done. And
it turns out it's only reducing risk, probably certainly less than 10% of their overall risk, and probably closer to 2%.
Okay.
But let's go 10%. It's reducing 10% of your risk. So instead of it being a security panacea, the reality is you just got rid of 10% of your risk. Let's give it the maximum possible it can be. You've just nailed 10% of your risk. Well, what's that mean? Well, that means, I need to go find out what that other risk is. And it turns out
that if a bad guy can make an end user run a Trojan, hey, here's your new VPN software. We're getting ready to switch VPN software because everybody's at home and been complaining about the Cisco VPN. So we're going to yada, yada VPN. And you need to run this executable and put the new VPN. If you can trick an end user into running an executable, your MFA just doesn't work. If you're not patched, the MFA does not work. And that is 90%. Like I even say like password policy only helps stop two types of password attacks. There's a lot of password attack types out there. There's account takeover and there's guessing and cracking and all this other stuff. Password policy only stops password guessing and password cracking. In order for your password not to be guessed, it just needs to maybe be 8 characters and maybe some complexity. You probably don't even need complexity, but add an uppercase or a character. Sure. No one's going to guess it. Password cracking, they can crack 8-character passwords now. One person, some guy sitting at home, in under 2 hours. If they use cloud computers, 4 or 5 cloud computers, under 12 minutes. Your password is not safe from password hash cracking until you get at least 16 characters. That's what we know about. We know that somebody has cracked up to 15 character passwords publicly. Maybe the NSA or China can do more than that because they're literally they now have password hash cracking rigs that do 300 billion guesses a second. But this is what I say about password hash cracking. In order for somebody to get your hash, most of the time they had to be domain admin, administrator, or root. Sure. They are already in your system or network with the ultimate keys of the kingdom. Instead of cracking your hash, they could just keylog you. Sure. So the reality is I'm not that worried about password hash cracking because it's game over. They're already in. They didn't need to steal your password hash to do what they're going to do. So it's really password guessing. And for password guessing, your password doesn't have to be that long. Although I do personally believe that it should be changed at least once a year. So if it gets hacked and it's somewhere out there on the internet or the dark web, they're not hacking you 7 years later. Yeah. But, so my personal password policy is use MFA. Use MFA where you can, which it turns out is not most places. Then you have to use a password. If you have to use a password, try to use a password manager because a password manager allows you to easily use long and complex passwords, which helps stop all of those types of attacks. And you can use a different password on every website, and all it costs you is a keystroke or something. If you don't have a password manager, I think passphrases. Roger jumped over the dog.
Sure. I was going to ask you about that.
Longer is better than complexity because as soon as you throw a complexity into it, the human being, if they have to remember it and reuse it, they start to either reuse it on other places or they start to create patterns. So it's Roger jumped over the brown dog 1, Roger jumped over the brown dog 2, Roger jumped over the brown dog 3, and they're using it across the internet. And then when the bad guy finds that pattern, he's like, look at this. This Roger jumped over the brown dog 1 and Roger jumped over the brown dog 7. I bet if I try a couple of these numbers, is the current account that it's going to work.
Is that where part of your passion with quantum computing comes in? Is this the new capabilities potentially of cracking passcodes, or does your interest in quantum go beyond that?
Yeah, I've been a 30-year quantum physics hobbyist, and my brain is always hurt trying to think about it. But certainly in 1994, Peter Shor came up with an algorithm that's now the famous Shor's algorithm that said, hey, if we get quantum computers and they have 2,000, 4,000, 8,000 bits, known as qubits, which we're just getting ready to have in the next year or two. Once we get enough quantum, and back when Peter Shor said this, there was no quantum computers. The first quantum computer got built in 1998, had 1 qubit bit. Well, now we have quantum computers with thousands of qubits, although it's not the right type of quantum computer. But I have a friend that he's told me the quantum computer that's the right type for breaking cryptography, they're going to have thousands within a couple of years. He thinks hundreds of thousands within 5 years. So we're just getting ready to be on this place where these quantum computers are getting powerful enough. And let me say, I think they probably already are. The government has them. They're not telling us. That's the job of the government. But when they do that, they're going to crack anything that's our asymmetric, our traditional asymmetric encryption is going to be broken. And it's interesting. So I've been following this since 94. Now it's finally happening. So that's why I kind of wrote the book. But the wild thing is, here's another thing. NIST said 4 years ago, it's been 2016, said, okay, quantum computing, where it can crack the asymmetric encryption, is getting right. We don't know when it's going to be. Could be as long as 10 years, but now is the time to prepare. So NIST told America,
and the National Institute of Science Academies and everything, and NSA said, okay, in 2016, now is the time for every organization to start preparing for this. Yet I don't talk to anyone that even knows this is an issue. It's like this looming Y2K problem getting ready to come across us. And when I talk to people about this, I gave a lecture on it today. It is like astounding. People are just like, I had no idea. And let me say, there are things you need to be doing today that are going, because if your competitor wants to learn your secrets, I would be sniffing your wireless network today, knowing that in a couple of years, within 2 years, 3 years, we have the quantum computers. I take my competitor's network traffic protected by TLS or RSA, and I read all the traffic. As a matter of fact, let me say, nation states, if you have to worry about nation states, they would be neglectful not to sniff each other's traffic today.
Well, that's the thing right now is that 75% of the internet traffic is SSL. So a lot of the security,
TLS.
Yeah, TLS. And so a lot of the security firewalls and things that we put in place for and manage for people, they're not even putting on internal SSL inspection. So they're only really looking at web traffic that's of the 25%. They're not even inspecting TLS. Because you can look at inbound and outbound of TLS, but that means you got to tune certs and you got to actually do the hard work that gets in way gets in way of your end users. And what you're saying is, from a nation state level, or from just trying to get advanced knowledge of your competitors, you got to be able to look inside that TLS all the time. And
if you have a critical secret that you need to protect for 5 or 10 years, it needs not to be on your network. You need to protect it because the encryption that you can encrypt it with symmetric encryption. Quantum computers are going to break the protection of symmetric encryption, AES, in half. Okay. So as long as you have AES 256-bit key or better, you're fine. If you have AES 128-bit, which is very common, that means when quantum computers come, that's AES 64. Well, we haven't broken 64-bit key AES, but we have broken 56-bit. So it's not that far off.
Shortly.
Yeah, so NSA says you should be 192. They're like, 192, it gets you a couple of years. Who wants to upgrade their ciphers for a couple of years, right? Just go to 256. As far as we know, unless a new Peter Shor's algorithm is invented one day, and one day it will be. But for right now, for the foreseeable future, if you have AES 256, that's strong enough. Gotcha. Now, on the asymmetric side, so that's RSA, Diffie-Hellman, elliptical curve cryptography, FIDO keys that I told you I love, it's all based upon that.
Okay.
Well, once they get enough qubits, which is very close, if not already done, all of that instantly becomes not protective. So if you've got a critical secret that you need to protect for the next 5 or 10 years, don't put it across your network, or you need to use quantum key distribution that is able to securely transport keys that are not quantum susceptible. Okay. And let me say, they've been selling quantum key distribution machines for 2 decades. The first one came out in 2000. And let me keep talking just one more second here. I think every company, every CISO today, there's no doubt in my mind, per this quantum problem, should be doing a data protection inventory. Figure out what data that you need to protect longer than a couple of years, where it is, how it's stored. Figure out what types of ciphers are protecting that data. What are the key sizes? Because you're going to very soon be asked to upgrade all of the quantum susceptible ciphers to what's known as post-quantum cryptography, the cryptography that the NSA chooses because it's not susceptible to quantum computers. Within the next couple of years, you're going to be told to do this massive upgrade. And you need to get on the start of doing a data protection inventory to see how big of a problem and what you need to upgrade and where it's located. You need to start talking to your vendors going, hey, I heard this crazy loon was talking about this coming quantum crypto break. What are you doing to prepare for it? And you're going to hear most of the people like, huh? They don't know. And it's funny because the NSA said in 2016, you need to start preparing now. And this is what they meant. Also, you need to create policies so that people aren't buying systems that are bringing in weak crypto today.
Yeah.
Right. Like if we know that AES 128 is too weak, I need to make a policy saying we're not allowing anything in unless it's AES 256. You need to stop the hemorrhage of what you're going to have to upgrade in a couple of, let me say, it could happen at any time up to a couple of years.
Unbelievable. I love it. I mean, it's just so key to the future is the quantum capabilities. This is going to give us a lot of the positive benefits from, if you consider AI and machine learning, some of those things positive, but it's also going to cause some of the swing the other way So,
yeah, I think quantum computers are going to give us things that are more life-changing than what the internet gave us.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, and I think about you and I, we were around before the internet, and we're like, oh my God, we can do so much today. I think quantum computers are going to make it's going to be even more than that, which is hard to conceive.
Well, right now with the current chipsets, we can't get the Moore's law. We can't get to the next level without burning. We're right at that cusp of the chip manufacturers. We're right at that top threshold. So quantum's going to allow that.
Although, you know what, Bill, I've been hearing that since probably 8 megahertz. Like somehow I hear that, I've read that story 20 times, and then all of a sudden Intel or AMD or somebody figures out I have heard that threshold. They're like, oh, we learned out we can use cadmium atoms. And, you know, and yes, and the quantum, the wild thing about quantum is that it doesn't have to follow Moore's law. It seems to be following Moore's law, but you get exponential, like, so every qubit in a binary computer, like if I have 1 bit, it can be a 1 or a 0, but it can only be a 1 or a 0 when storing or transmitting information. If I have 2 bits, that's 2 1s or 0s, but it can represent 4 pieces of information, right? 1 1 0 0 1 0 0 1. But it can only be 2 bits of information anytime it's transmitting and storing information. A single qubit quantum bit can be 3 things all at once. It can be a 0, a 1, and a 1 and a 0. So as you start to add qubits up, let me blow your mind here. They think that they can fit all information that has ever occurred in the universe, every atom, molecule, spin, recording of every atom move, and 400 qubits.
Oh, wow.
And I just told you, a friend of mine, says, like, we're going to have a couple thousand, right, within a couple of years, and hundreds of thousands a couple of years after that. We're going to have this incredible capacity that, you know, they're going to be making better medicines, better car batteries. We're going to be able to drive our self-driving cars without having stoplights and stop signs, because they'll figure out how to adjust the speed so we keep moving. Our medicines will have less side effects. Every time I hear a medicine commercial today, it sounds like an SNL parody commercial. And they always end with, you know, and in real life, they all may cause diarrhea or death. I was like, well, why did you have to put the diarrhea one? Because it's the last one that's really capturing my attention. This medicine calms you down, but may cause homicidal thoughts. I'm like, I don't think they had to print it unless it was really seemed to be indicative of the medication. It seems to me, stop. That trial didn't fail. Somebody was trying to kill somebody because of your medicine, and they didn't fail. Well, but hopefully the quantum mechanics will allow it to be more successful 100%. And have less side effects.
Roger, I think we got to wrap up. I want to get you off to your next webinar that you said you're going to do. But before you go, so your book is out, and it's hacking multi-factor authentication. So I'll put links to it on for people to go buy that on Amazon. And is there anything you want to just that your subconscious said, you know what, I got to tell Bill's audience this before I go? Or do you feel like you covered all topics ever for the end of time? Somehow I don't think so.
I did cover a lot of stuff, so I appreciate you putting up with me. But, you know, just on the multi-factor thing, I'll say that I do cover not only the good and bad multi-factor, but there's no such thing as the right solution for anyone. But I do have in there, I think, a really good framework of how you choose the right solution for you or your company. Because there's a lot to think of. And I literally have spreadsheets and stuff. And I say, here's the critical stuff you have to ask yourself. This is the optional stuff. You know, like one of the first thing is what are you trying to protect? You have to pick an MFA solution that protects the stuff you're trying to protect. And no MFA solution covers everything. So you have to start to pick, okay, what am I really going to cover versus not cover? Because that is the first step in determining, okay, can I get Google Authenticator or RSA key or a FIDO key? You can't even choose that option until you at least find out, well, what do they even cover?
Absolutely. Well, I highly recommend the book. And Roger, this has been a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, and I love wide-ranging conversations. And ultimately, I really did enjoy the book as well. And so, until next time, we will do a round 2 sometime in the future.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.
Take care, Roger. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net/podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.